Welcome to the Smart QA Musings, which is a gentle flurry of interesting thoughts. Today I want to muse upon the external things, the externalities that matter. That is something beyond our fundamental capabilities and processes and tools in our journey of software excellence. And that's why it's titled as Beyond Capability, Externalities Matter. And this is in a way inspired by my tryst with long distance cycling. Let me give a bit of a background of what this is and how this parallel of cycling I'm trying to use to relate to something that we do every day in our journey of software excellence. I am an endurance cyclist. I do brevets. So what does that mean? Brevets are basically self-supported events where there is a route that is given, there is a distance that is given, there is a specified time that you have to complete with. The smallest distance is about 200 kilometers to be accomplished in about 13.5 hours. And some of the larger ones, there are more larger ones too, that I have done is about 1200. So that is about 90 hours. Remember, the clock does not stop, so you keep on riding until you complete. So it is self-supported, which simply means you are on your own. So if you have a mechanical issue, if you want to figure out the food, if you want to sleep, the road is your companion, right? So there isn't anything else. So given the fact that this is a long distance endurance-based cycling, what does it take? Well, it takes a certain amount of good fitness from a cyclist perspective. Certainly it takes a decent bike, because these have to run non-stop for quite a lot of distance over a different set of terrain. But is it just a matter of the person, the cyclist, or quote-unquote the bike, the technology? Are those two things good enough to guarantee successful completion? And what you really find out when you start doing these rides is, no, it takes much more than this. A successful completion is no more just limited by the cyclist or the bike. So I put on some pictures for you just to illustrate what that means. So for example, in the leftmost picture, you find little terrain. So this is one of the recent rides that we did about a week ago, where you went from Bangalore to Chikmagalur, which is about 300 kilometers one way, climbed two mountains up there. The mountains are Baba Budangiri and Mulyangiri, which are involved at an approximate elevation of about 7,500 meters. To give you the perspective, it's about 75-80% of Mount Everest in terms of height, right? And then this entire distance is about 600 kilometers, spanning about 7,500 approximately elevation. And that's why you see these little spikes out there. And what you're supposed to do is supposed to follow the route. There are intermediate control points that you check in to demonstrate, and that's to give you the idea of a brevet, which is about 600 hours, takes about 40 hours. Now, what you encounter is you encounter traffic, you encounter mist, you encounter rain, you encounter bad roads, you encounter a variety of different externalities which go beyond the realm of the biker or the bike. And that's why I'm trying to state that it takes beyond the successful completion. All I'm trying to do is to relate it to what we do and then see if there are interesting parallels. And that's what I want to muse about. So every journey, whether it's on the wheels or in the code, it's shaped by much more than what we control. Remember, as engineering people, we always want to be in total control. We want to have control by our processes, by our practices, enabled by tools, measures, metrics, etc. But in reality, I don't think that really is that easy, because there are a lot of things that are outside, and that's really what the externalities. And therefore, I'm trying to muse upon bringing in ideas from endurance to the externalities, and then look at what are some of the routes to quality, because after all, building software is not a one-time sprint. It is a bit of an endurance. We build a piece of product, whether it's a product or an application. It is supported, it is patched up, it is enhanced, and it is a longer time. So it's not something that you do one shot and throw it away. So I'm going to weave this, I'm going to kind of we will present the ideas here in two parts. Initial part just give you a perspective from cycling, just to relate, and then the latter part connect some of these ideas to the context of software, and then probably leave with some interesting thought at the end. So when you look at these kinds of events, these kinds of sports, which are really long distance cycling, which is more of a journey, and what I've shown you is probably a shorter version. There are really longer versions too. There are long distance events which span few thousands of kilometers. So in fact, one of my good friend did a 10,000 kilometer journey all by himself. About, of course, is slightly supported. So it's called the Red Bull race. So the funny part is, it's amazing as to how far one can go. But what does it really take to succeed in a long distance cycling kind of a journey or an event like what I kindly mentioned? I'm sure you will agree with me that it takes a good cyclist. So you need to train for it, you need to build up strength, you need to have the mental makeup, you need to have the grit, because long distance on a road which can sometimes be very empty takes a lot of mental power. It's not just the physical power. So certainly I think that you will appreciate that the mental makeup, the mindset, the physical power, the capabilities of the individual, in this case the cyclist, matters. But is that all? No. It takes much more than the individual strength or the individual stamina, and that's what we're going to talk about. Right? And so part one is, yes, it takes a good cyclist. Part two, we need a good machine. There are different kinds of cycles. This is what I've shown you as a picture, is a road bike which is optimized for speed. Some of them are endurance varieties, some of them are road bike varieties, which I'm sure you might have seen in the Tour de France if you watch the TV. And a long distance bike, there are some geometry changes that are there between the racing variety and the endurance variety. Let me show you them. But why am I talking about the machine? Because every gear, every bolt, every adjustment, every part in this machine is very critical. Meaning you are worried about if the saddle height is 2 millimeters off. You're worried whether the angle of the handlebar is half a degree off. You're worried about the tension of the screw if it is 5 newtons beyond. Because all of them play a significant part in a long distance journey. So the one of the key critical elements of the performance is, in addition to the person, certainly the machine. And a well-tuned bike is very essential. You're talking about every part, whether it be the mechanical parts, whether you're talking about the wheels and the tubes and the tires, everything matters. Okay, so we talked about the cyclist, the person, we talked about the machine, which is underlying technology. Then comes all the things outside of this. There are elements that are significantly outside of us, the externalities, which play a significant role in delivering the highest performance to accomplish their task at hand. Like what? The weather. The weather is shifting. So in the recent ride, we had rains for a long time. We had fog when we were climbing down the mountain and climbing up the mountain. We had sunshine, hot weather on the last day when we were returning back. So in a matter of 2 nights and 1 day, we could see a variety of weather pattern which shifts, and your body has to learn to adapt. We saw roads that were it threw up a lot of surprises. It's not always the highways. We go through highways, we go through village roads, we go to mountain roads. So some of the roads are slushy, as you saw in the first picture. They are slushy, filled with mud, slippery. Some of them are gravelly, so they can torture you, they can torture your bike. So there is roads, that is surprising, the surfaces. Well, as you get closer to some towns or cities, there is traffic, which I think I also showed you in the first picture. So it's mad traffic. Given India, you have complicated traffic situations, right? It's food. Now, interesting part is you like to think that you can carry all the food. You can't carry all the food because only so much limited that you can carry. So you need food and water. And so we depend on certain places, because I remember I told you it's self-supported. So you depend on certain restaurants and small places for water and stuff. So sometimes when you go up in the mountains, sometimes when you go into really desolate places, like we went through forests, there isn't food, there isn't sometimes water. So there are externalities, right? Oh, by the way, there are many rides where dogs chases, sometimes elephants chases. So, and then of course you've got, when you're tired and you're resting, you got all the other elements like mosquitoes. And in a wet place like Chikmagalur, leeches are your friends too. They climb up your pants, right? So it's complicated. So you have got other externalities like animals and insects and so on. And finally, of course, is the clothes, the jersey that you wear, the shorts that you wear, the gloves that you use. Over a long distance, they rub you and rub you and rub you and cause problems in your body. They cause you chafing, blisters, and so on and so forth. So the point I'm trying to make with this particular slide is to give you the gist that there are a lot of things outside of the capability of the cyclist or the technology that is used in the machine which cause problems, which ultimately which come in the way of us delivering high performance. Right? Then, of course, is the route. We are given a route. We normally have a GPX file. We have a little device. We mount it on the handlebar. It tells you, go ahead because you are riding. Sometimes the routes are also messed up because of other glitches. Sometimes the software does make some mistakes. And if I don't have a very clear direction, clarity of direction, I could be off. So there are times when you go off the route and you discover after about 10, 15, 20 minutes, you retrace the route. It could happen in the middle of the night when it's pitched dark, stuff like that, right? So the accuracy, the detours, the forks, and sometimes there is road construction, there are other issues, accidents. So we're talking about not just, the externalities in terms of, it's also the map, it's also the device which shows you the map. And there are other things that are there. So when you look at it, when you look at the entire notion, that entire ride, the notion of endurance riding is a very living system where you are in tune, where the machine, the cyclist, the route, the world outside, they all kind of interact. They all matter. They're all unpredictable. Much like what we have in software, isn't it? Because we like to think that we project manage it, we use the right technology, everything works. And you and I know that's not true. So isn't building and delivering software in a journey, a software journey, isn't it much like this? And that's what I'm trying to muse about. I'm sure you can relate to that very easily now. So where is the context? Where is the relationship? So our kind of cyclists are really the teams and the individuals. And what you're really focusing on is in the people and the practice side of things. Do you have good people mindset, culture, governance in place from a practice as an individual habits, skills, and therefore they matter. Right? So what we're really saying is the journey towards software excellence, journey towards, journey of high performance QA, the equivalent of cyclist is the focus, the skills, the habits which shape the project's journey, which are really people aspects on one side, and the individual practices of each people, the way they think, the way they analyze, the mindsets that are in place, the methodologies that they are used, and so on and so on. That's part one. So we're talking about the cyclist part. We'll move on to the machine part. So our systems that we use, our architecture, our tools, that we use to construct are really the bikes, equivalent of the bikes. Where we are saying it's not just about the active validation, right? The way you build the software, the engineering aspects of product. That means, you're looking at, the way you architect, the way you compose, the way you make choices of certain frameworks, libraries, and the tools, and ultimately the personal craftsmanship that comes across in the product engineering space are really the equivalent of bikes, and that's really the system, right? And so if they are not well crafted, if they have issues, obviously there are challenges, and they decide how far, how well we travel. So when we are evaluating, we are not just evaluating the final code. We are really looking at it from the way we conceive of ideas and requirements, the way we express them, the way we architect them, the way we integrate and build them, the choice of frameworks, the choice of tools, the choice of technologies, and the way we assemble them matter. And that's really the equivalent of the notion or the idea of bike. So we talked about the parallel to the cyclist in terms of teams and individuals, which are people in practice. And now we are trying to connect it to the parallel to the machine. And we're saying how everything needs to be tuned. And that tuning is a composition of the way we engineer. So which means our role from, if I were to look at it from a role of an assurance specialist, it probably requires me to understand the nuances of the engineering aspects of what is done, certain internal aspects of how it is constructed, composed, the tools, technologies, frameworks, stuff that is used to build the entire stuff. And all those matter to ultimately validating the system and delivering a great system. Right? And of course, the craftsmanship not only of mine, but also the other people who are constructing, who are analyzing, and so on and so on. They decide how far, how well we go. Now comes the other externalities, like the weather that we talked about, like the road that we mused about. Software also lives in a world of shifting requirements. We know that things change. We may not like it, but it changes. There are changes due to regulatory requirements sometimes, customer requirements sometimes, business requirements sometimes. There are probably sudden bursts of traffic that happen on a product and therefore it fails and there are newer devices, newer technologies that come into picture. So the world changes, and that is what we're trying to take care in terms of by the process part, by an environment part. We're trying to put certain controls, we're trying to put some measures to sense make, we're trying to be adaptive to the environment because it's constantly buffeting us, and we're trying to take some comfort in managing that environment to the best of our abilities via some notion of a process. Process to control, process to manage, process to assess and sense make via measures, metrics, reports, controls, roles, responsibilities. But that's what we're trying to do to weather the storms, to weather the changes, and so on and so forth. So we talked about really the people and practice. We kind of tried the connection between the systems and the tools to the bike. And now we are looking at it from the externalities and saying maybe that's what we're attempting to do when we become cognizant of the externalities and trying to adjust them into some sense of process and environment. And then there is a bunch of unexpected along the way. Shifting priorities, sudden changes, like the stray animals, like the, when you travel that long a distance, you have other problems. You've got punctures, you've got chains which break, you've got brakes that fail. So we've had all these shared challenges in the last week. So my front brake went away. I had about, between about friends of me and mine, we had about 6 punctures which cost us time. Some people's tires blew up. Some people's chain broke. So all kinds of mechanical issues because various things, road, rains, and so on. Like that we have issues from other systems, certain outages that occur and cause problems to our system, priorities of shifting that suddenly change, and therefore in the process of handling the shifting priorities, I probably break things, I don't test certain things, and they are the unexpected, and those happen and they will continue to happen. You can put whatever process that you want, but suspect it's not going to fix it, but you know how to handle it, right? And that's where I guess it takes. And so when we look at it from a right perspective, what we're trying to say is, look, we can be well prepared. We can have the greatest of the bike. We can know the route. We can plan for that. But then what it takes for us to successfully complete any of these long distance, be it a 200 or be it a 100, is extreme awareness of the environment, of the situation just outside. The constant ability to adapt and adjust and engage with the externalities. And that is something that over time and experience we learn to handle, because the clock is not stopping, the clock is running. And sometimes the clock is not in your favor, meaning it tells you that, look, you are not going to make it in time, so you might not technically finish the event. Right? You might be running out. But then in endurance kind of an event, sometimes our interest is not just the actual act of finishing in the time. Sometimes just the act of finishing even beyond the stated time is an accomplishment. And in fact, in the last event, I had to be outside of the time because it was fairly challenging with a lot of other challenges in the time. But the fact was, I did complete. So the best journeys, be it on the road or be it in our active code, are defined by how consciously we engage with what surrounds us, which I think in a very gender loose word we call as context most of the times. And that is not really by just our skill and capabilities that we have from the product or a software or a process, but it's really about how we handle the externalities, of how we handle those things that the world throws our way. So in the last experience, that of last week, we had to go without food because we mischecked the fact that in the next 30-40 kilometers, which had fairly steep gradients along when we were climbing the hill, we didn't have food, we didn't have water. We had to make do with it, right? Or we had to kind of suddenly come to a section. We went through Badra Tiger Reserve in the place. So we suddenly had to encounter, not tigers, but extremely bad roads. So it was fully gravelish. So 4 kilometers of extremely patchy road, we couldn't cycle. We had to push it for about 4 kilometers uphill with very bad roads. Now, what are you worried about? Oh my gosh, my time is running out. I'm not making speed. I'm not. So what you do, you learn to adapt. You learn to calm yourself down. You learn not to look at the meter. You learn not to look at the clock. And that's how we learn to handle. Initially it is very frustrating, but then you slowly become very immersive. You start being very in the flow, and that's what happens, right? And therefore, on a final parting kind of remark, maybe a real notion of excellence is less about what is under our control. It's not just about what we think we can control, right? It's probably more about how we observe, notice, sense make, how we adapt, how we thrive alongside the various externalities that exist. The parallel I took was cycling, but I think you can now relate to the externalities as far as software is concerned that shape every journey that we embark upon. Because after all, we don't just release a version and then go away. We release a version, we fix issues, we enhance them, we support them, we adapt them to newer technologies, newer stuff. So truly speaking, every of these journeys that we do is an endurance journey. And it is unless we are sensitive and unless we learn to nurture our ability to adapt, ability to sense make, ability to be friends with the externalities over time and accept the externalities, it's hard. And that's why I think sometimes the notion of immersion is very important, because immersion simply means you are very much inside the system, you are very much with it, with the flow. And that's what one of the methodologies that I talk about, which is hypothesis-based immersive session testing, is about attempting to fuse the idea of the practices in the context of processes enabled by tools, but then at the end of the day have certain mindset orientation that allows us to blossom, that allows us to take care of these situations, because there's nothing much we can do. So it is not about how much do we have in our control. It is about how we manage, how we are able to adapt and adjust along the way. And that's, every time when I do any of these long distance events, be it in terms of cycling or sometimes running, it's fascinating because you discover another part of yourself every time. And then you humble yourself in the entire process, because you think you know, you think you have gotten all of them under control, and the curveball is there every time. And I guess that's a fun part, and that's what I think makes us go back to doing that again and again and again, because it's a process of self-discovery. And that's what got me into this kind of a sport maybe a little over a decade ago, and it's fun. It's challenging, it's demanding, but yeah, it's kind of fun. And every time I do this, I always kind of reflect on the professional aspect, on what I do. the software aspects. So I thought I'd share. In fact, I think much earlier on I'd also had another parallel of cycling and software, so to speak, which I think was titled Power is to Weight, where I said, does it take more power, or does it, you have to be a less weight? And I think I looked at it from the context of accelerating assurance. But yeah, every time I always muse about it in the context of what we do. Thank you.